Dr. Kaycee Brock, thank you so much for being here with us. We truly appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So you are a candidate for the seat 8 at large for the Atlanta Public Schools Board of Education race. Can you talk to me about why is the time for you to run right now?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I've been in education for over 18 years. It's my whole career. I started as a first grade teacher, and then I taught sixth grade. I was an assistant principal, a district coach. And so I feel like all of that experience has brought me to a place where I feel like I can offer a lot of value to the board. Right now, Atlanta Public Schools is in such an interesting place, but in a place where they need true leadership to take on this role to take us to the next level.
And you mentioned your experience.
Mm-hmm.
You do have years under your belt in the world of education.
Yeah.
What do you think, what should the biggest advantage that you're bringing to this race from your years of education?
Well, on the school board, I think a lot of people see them at different events and see them in the community, which you absolutely should be doing those things so you can get the voice of everyone, of every stakeholder. But they're really policymakers. They make big decisions on the budget. They're managing and supporting the superintendent. And so all of those things require somebody who has a lot of experience in that kind of work. I've worked in large public school districts serving thousands and hundreds of thousands of students. And I've also worked in small school settings where I understand what it's like to be a teacher, to work with students, to see them struggle. And so all of those things bring me to a place where I can understand what that first grade teacher is going through. I can also understand what that district leader is going through. And all of that combined brings me to a place where I'm ready to take on the role.
If you are elected, what's your day one priority?
Oh my goodness, our literacy proficiency rates. If you've ever been in a classroom, if anyone listening has ever been in a classroom, the toughest moment as a teacher is when a student can't access the information. As you'd imagine, that leads to so much when it comes to mental health, to behavior challenges, to just how a student feels about themselves as a student. That's really that first step, is when they can't read. Right now, our literacy proficiency rates, it's close to 30%. Yet our graduation rate is around 90%. And even though we're celebrating that, there's obviously a really big gap there. And so I intend to fill that gap to bring it a little bit closer to make sure that more students are reading across the district. Because if they can, and then they're graduating, I can only imagine what will happen in 10 years when we get to a place where there are adults in Atlanta who aren't able to live the life of their dreams because they haven't had a great educational experience.
Why do you think people are being able to graduate and not have that reading proficiency?
I think we have to be really clear about the standards for graduation. We're making sure that every student has a post-secondary pathway that's really clear before they graduate. Right now, that's not a requirement, and I think that that's something that we should look into, because if you're a young person, no matter if you're going to college or if you're going straight into the workforce, you still have to know what steps it'll take to be able to get to that place. But that also requires more counselors in schools, especially college counselors. A lot of counselors in schools are actually guidance counselors who don't have that experience as a college counselor. So as you'd imagine, there's a lot of training required, or potentially investing in placing college counselors in schools so that students can get that kind of support. But then also you've got to look at our standards for graduation. I know, and I do not believe in holding a bunch of students back in school, but I do believe in being very proactive about what steps we need to take so that students are actually prepared and get all the skills they need to graduate and be ready for the world.
What about those graduation requirements would you want to see change?
So one is that post-secondary pathway, that clarity. So every student graduating, is you're walking across the stage, and you also have completed some kind of form to say, this is what my next step is, this is how I need to get here, these are the certifications and the requirements necessary, and that is my next step. I'd also like to see us as a district invest more in that transition process from high school to the post-secondary pathway. There's a lot of districts around the country that have invested in bridge programs, and that's really helpful, and statistically speaking can lead to success for students beyond high school graduation, so that they're able to pursue that pathway, not only get there, but also complete it. I mean, there's a lot of conversation about should we require FAFSA for every student that's graduating, although there are some challenges with that right now with a lot of what's happening at the federal level.
And not every student goes to college either.
Not every student goes to college, but that also can go towards other kinds of programs that they can get funding for. The challenge is right now federally, there's some issues with that, with putting all of your personal information out there. At one point it was safe, it's not as safe as it used to be. And then I think we can also look into requirements when it comes to different kinds of testing, right? So for example, if you go into the military, you may not have to take the ACT or the SAT, but you have to take the ASVAB, right? And so again, every single pathway you take, there is something that is required to get there, but it takes adults in the building understanding what those things are, whether it be that counselor, that guidance leader, and making sure that students are actually completing those steps. So there's different pathways, and I don't think there should be one requirement for every kid, but there should be some kind of pathway towards what they want to achieve, and kids should know how to get there.
Can I ask you, because you mentioned at the federal funding, let's say you get this position, you're on the board, and there is a situation placed in front of you where it's get rid of this program or lose funding. How would you go about that? And I know it's a hypothetical, so it could be any which way, but just generally speaking, how would you help to, I guess, steer the school system in a way that is, they're being funded, but still, you know, trying not to conflict with anything that's happening in Washington to block that federal funding? Or should the school board just do what they're supposed to do anyway and say, we'll find the funding elsewhere?
I would prefer to find the funding elsewhere if possible. That's such a challenging position to be in because you don't want to lose opportunities for young people to get funding for different programs that they should be in and could be in. At the same time, it's important that we are centering equity in our schools and making sure that we have people in these roles who are not afraid to protect students and to protect families. And I have no problem making sure that that is a priority for me, is that I am protecting students and families, because even looking at our absenteeism rate, I mean, people are afraid. Some people aren't coming to school because they don't feel supported or they're scared. We're losing a lot of parents right now in the parent engagement because they don't know that schools are a safe place for them.
Are you saying that they're scared? And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just to clarify, they're scared because of the different directives?
Yeah, so when you think about immigration, and I've worked in very diverse schools my entire career, and I've had to build a lot of trust with parents, but even thinking about things like immigration and parent safety there and family safety there, there's just a lot of challenges right now that make even adults, but also students, not feel welcome in schools. But our absenteeism rate is around 30% right now.
Right, and that's an issue that's facing APS right now. Do you have any specific strategies that you'd like to see implemented to tackle that?
For absenteeism? Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing is make sure schools are a joyful place and a great place to be. It's challenging right now because of technology. And so in a world 20 years ago where students all had textbooks and, you know, they were writing everything, now most students are on some kind of computer. Their attention span is a lot tougher to get a hold of. And so we've got to be innovative in how we look at classrooms and learning. And so the first thing I'd want to do is kind of take an audit of that. Like, how innovative are we actually being right now in what we are offering students in terms of kinds of learning and ways of learning? Does everyone have the technology needed to ensure that students have like the most up-to-date resources to be able to learn? But then the other side of that is this is a community engagement challenge. And it's not just about schools, it's about more than just the school. And so there are partners that we could work with to bring more young people back into schools, to build that trust with parents. It can't just be the school alone doing that. So I'd be a huge advocate of bringing in community leaders, community partners, and getting them to go door to door, talk to parents, and try to get students back into APS schools. But then the third is there was a diversion study that was done of why students are leaving the district, and a big reason is programs and programs that meet the needs of their children. And so I think it's important also to see why people are leaving and what we could potentially offer so that they come back, because some are choosing homeschool, some are choosing other school options. But I believe that APS schools can be the best place for students and families, but we are responsible for making it so.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about one of your priorities. You say you want to have strong schools in every zip code. Can you expand on that, and what would it take to make that happen?
Oh, that's a great question. So the citywide seat is something I'm really excited about, the at-large seat, mainly because I want to look across the entire district and see what we're doing in different communities, not just where I live. And so it's important for me to hear from parents and from community members from across the district and see is everybody getting the same resources, but not just getting the same resources, but the resources that they need for their particular community. When you look across the district, even yesterday I saw something that said it was by the city, so I think that's true. It said that the life expectancy rate is 67 for the south and the west side of the city, but 87 for the north and the east side. But that correlates with what we're seeing in education and academic outcomes. It all starts with our schools. And so on the south side and the west side, also the reading proficiency rates are significantly lower. And so I believe that we should have our best talent in the areas of the city that are struggling the most.
How do you attract them there?
Yeah, oh gosh. Well, I'm a proponent of stipends and bonuses for performance. When I was first teaching, I was teaching reading. My students grew over 2 years in reading, and I got a stipend for that. And I was 23, it was my first job, but I was working really hard to be able to see those results. And it wasn't about the money, honestly. The joy of your kids being able to read at the end of the year is just something you can't beat, but it was an incentive for me. I also entered teaching through a program because I knew I was going into a school that had greater need, and I was drawn to that. And I think there are people who would be, but pay matters, and so I know that we increase teacher pay, but again, if there are additional incentives, then I think that's a really great way to attract the best talent. And I think also partnering with higher ed. In my day job, one of my roles is thinking about how we can partner with higher ed institutions to bring better talent or the best talent into teaching. But I think we could partner with lots of schools in Georgia and give incentives for students to come into APS and be our next great workforce in teaching.
Thank you so much for that answer. Can I ask you about school safety? Because unfortunately, we see the headlines having to deal with our most vulnerable young students and teachers and staff in their schools. What's the biggest missing component right now? And we could go statewide, but we'll stay at APS because this is your race. But what's missing right now in terms of safety for the students at APS?
Yeah, I will tell you, I have been in a couple of situations in schools where there was a shutdown because of fear of someone in the building, and it is a very scary position to be in. And so this question is really important to me, just because that level of responsibility you feel to keep kids safe, it's just so important. And unfortunately, right now it's become so normalized that we're not even talking about it enough, and it's really upsetting. There's a lot, of course, at the federal level that I would like to see happen. In APS, as I've been touring schools and talking to school leaders, one thing that's come up to me is the actual physical facilities. So do they have a gate if they're asking for it? Are all of the doors working properly, right? We've seen stories recently where, a recent incident where the door was ajar and it wasn't working, and that allowed that person to come into the building and take innocent lives. And so making sure that we as a school board ensure that schools have everything they need for the building to be physically safe is first and foremost, and that money should come from APS. It shouldn't have to come from foundations and community partners, which some schools are actually relying on to be able to make those kinds of changes. And then I think the next thing is making sure that there are mental health resources, not just if something happens, but before, right? Is there somebody that young people can talk to if they're going through something? Bullying, it tends to be a big issue with a lot of the young people who make these terrible decisions to go into schools and hurt others. And so are there safe places and adults for them to talk to? But then also, even if nothing's happened, right? Making sure there are counselors there, because if something happens at another school, you might still yourself be afraid to go to school. And so just mental health generally, like resources in schools, is really important.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of these ideas will take funding.
Yes.
How would you pay for all of this?
Yeah, that's a great, I love that question because people don't ask it enough. Yeah. Well, as you know, there's a huge facilities plan that's underway, and that is going to free up some money in APS to be able to do additional things. And so I would see a good amount of the money coming from that. And then another one, as I've done my own audit and looked at different programs that are being offered, there's a lot of small pilots and try this here and maybe see if this works here, but not with results. It's really hard to look at ROI, return on investment, when it comes to student success. But I do think it is possible to take a look at some of these smaller programs where we're not seeing much change and much progress, and taking that money and repurposing it for some of the ideas that I'm talking about.
Thank you so much for your answer. Well, we have just enough time for one more question, and I like to leave this last question as kind of like an open dialogue for you to the community, to the voters. What would you like for them to know as they are within early voting right now, of course, and then election day is on November 4th?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, I'm experienced, and again, I can't say how much it's important for the next school board member to have experience, but my experience is unique. I've helped students learn how to read, I've helped them get into college, I've helped them graduate from college. So I know this from beginning to end. I think that I'll bring a really unique perspective to the school board in that way. But the other thing is why people should care, and I've been talking a lot about this. Many people who are constituents who will not be voting in this election do not have kids in APS. So I've been talking a lot to that group and saying you also should care for many reasons. One, taxes, they matter. And the school board is heavily involved in figuring out how that tax money is used. But then also the future of our city. I don't want us to regret in 10 years not investing in making sure that we have the right people in this kind of position when we look at our next generation and our workforce and we're like, wow, they're not even from APS schools because we did not invest enough in our young people. And then I feel like everybody should care about children. They can't make all of their decisions on their own. They can't choose where they live. They can't choose where they grow up. They can't choose their community. They can't choose their family, anything like that. But as adults, I do think it's all of our responsibility to make sure that the right people are in the right roles to be able to help them grow up in a world that's better and in Atlanta that's better. And I think I'm the right person for that job.
Dr. Kaycee Brock, thank you so much for coming down. We truly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.